Too much health. Too aggressive. Too much punishment for failure. Too large of a jump in difficulty. Video games have grown a lot as a genre, no longer being limited to just archaic things like Pong or Tetris. Now they're their own large entertainment medium with tons of entries beloved or maligned by many, and one of the most popular aspects of a video game is the boss fights. The big hurdles to overcome, the epic climaxes of the story, the parts with cool music, and sometimes the reason you play through the entire game up to that point just to experience it. But what about when a video game boss goes overboard and is too much? Now, being too much can vary from person to person, but they all have different aspects. Sometimes it's one specific issue that was exacerbated, and other times it's a combination of many things to make the perfect storm of unenjoyable nonsense. But regardless, there are many things that, depending on the person, can make a video game boss too much. And I want to talk about bosses that I think channel those aspects, or in combinations of the bunch. Some sentiments on these bosses I'm in lockstep agreement with. Other bosses I think don't deserve the flack they get, and some I think don't get enough flack, and potentially hot takes on that matter. But either way, let's dive on in. Part 1. Too Tanky. I feel like the best place to start here is with one of the most infamous bosses in Final Fantasy history. And don't worry, we'll talk about the other one later in this video. In the meantime, let's talk about Yzmat, one of the many super bosses of Final Fantasy XII, likely one of the last 2, maybe 3 you'll encounter. Does this mean Yzmat is the hardest boss in the game? No, not even close, but it is definitely notorious for one specific reason. That is his health bar. Yzmat has 50,112,254 HP. This is more or less the highest health bar of any video game boss. Okay, fine, technically Simon has more health, but by the time you fight him, you've broken the 9999 damage cap. Here, Yzmat has a damage cap placed on him, so each hit you deal is going to do 9,999 at most. Except when it doesn't because Zodiac Age. So we all know how extreme Yzmat's health is, from the memes most likely, but that doesn't paint the full picture. You see, this guy has the ability to one-shot any party member, with most of his attacks easily being able to hit 9,999, but only sometimes. And to make matters worse, at half health, he'll buff all his stats including his defense to make him even bulkier, and start spamming the move Stone Breath, which can petrify a party member, and that may as well be instant death if you've played Final Fantasy XII. And that's not all, because when Yzmat gets down to his final 2 million HP, he gets a bit funky with his AI and starts putting Reflect on your party members in an attempt to make the zoned out player bounce their healing spells back onto him by mistake and drop a holy ball right in their face. And if you accidentally heal him with Renew, it fully heals him, resetting the entire boss fight. So, is this boss fight too much? Well, it depends. See, the PS2 version of the game, I'd say most definitely, as that defense buff hard caps all future damage to 6,999 at half health, and even the best runs will still average around 3 hours to win, and likely take more than double that time. But there is always the ability to leave the arena and heal at the save point, and get restocked before resuming the fight with Yzmat, at basically the same HP level. The Zodiac Age added a ton of quality of life improvements and also made the license board more intricate, despite initially seeming more restricted. Between that, his hard damage cap no longer dropping at half health, and the insane speed up of Zodiac Age's turbo mode, this fight can be down in around 30 to 40 minutes. Still a marathon, definitely, but it's nowhere near as bad as the behemoth he once was. And it really just depends on what version of the game you're playing as to whether or not the boss is too much, and honestly, I'd take this fight over Pandemonium any day of the week. I do wish he had his own boss theme though, because you will get sick of this song by the time you get to this boss fight, and the fact that it can last hours is not going to help its case. Part 2. Difficulty Spikes. We all know about difficulty spikes, that point where the game randomly makes everything much harder than anything before it without proper preparation, and oftentimes even harder than stuff that comes after it. And I think one of the most drastic is the final boss of Lunar Silver Star Story, Galleon. Is he the hardest boss on the planet? No, definitely not. But when most of the game is easy enough to pretty much auto-battle your way through without much concern, it's some pretty severe whiplash when you get to the final battle, and all of a sudden you have a boss that not only gets a minimum of 2 attacks every turn, including all the ultimate elemental spells, but he has a dark beam that can hit multiple party members and does more damage than the game's HP cap. Most bosses in this game have 2, maybe 3 attacks, and those attacks consist of things like a regular attack, some sort of damaging skill, and some sort of damaging skill but magic. Meanwhile, Galleon here can create barriers to nullify any and all damage dealt to him until the barrier is broken. He can drain your party member's HP to heal himself, and he always combos his tornado attack, which breaks your magic barriers and clumps your party together, with a powerful AoE explosion that you just kinda gotta face tank because of the way he gets his double actions. And unlike some JRPG bosses, grinding isn't the solution here because bosses in this game scale to your level, and Galleon has the highest scaling of any boss in the game by far. So trying to power level against Galleon will make him stronger as well, and it's not a good idea. So, is this boss fight too much? Yeah, probably so. It's not a case where you can't beat this boss, or even that I don't enjoy him, but I play challenging games for fun. And while a hard final boss isn't a bad thing, the sheer jump in difficulty Galleon has from anything else in the game is just crazy. Nothing else comes remotely close to his difficulty in this game, and outside of Zenobia and the Sewer Dragon, most of the bosses were piss easy to begin with, so while a prepared player might find some enjoyment out of this in-game challenge, I think someone going in blind enjoying a casual run is likely going to be in for an unpleasant experience, and to rub salt in the wound, the sequence with Luna afterwards used to insta-kill you and send you back to the last save, likely before Galleon, if you messed up the order of operations. So, thankfully, they were actually removed that in the remaster, and while I'm sure purists weep at the loss of instant death bullshit, I, for one, do not miss it. Part 3. Absolute Virtue. Okay, so to be honest, I don't have a personal connection with this game like I do some of the other bosses on this list, but I'd be remiss if I didn't include one of the most infamous video game bosses of all time that even after 20 years still gives people Vietnam War flashback levels of PTSD. The Absolute Virtue is a super boss hidden in Final Fantasy XI. To answer the question of, is this boss too much? The answer is yes, most definitely. No other video game boss outside of a Rage game could even hope to come close to this monster. For those unfamiliar with the horror of Absolute Virtue, let me put it this way. To even get to this boss, you have to defeat another boss before, and then he has a chance of spawning in. And to continue that, it took over a year after this boss being released for it to even be discovered, and it took, I believe, about 3 years for it to be defeated. But, to put it other ways, this boss not only has high stats, it also has insane HP regeneration, and the move Benediction, which allows the boss to recover half of his max HP, and this move can be cast multiple times. Some attempts of this boss were reported to take upwards of 30 hours to beat the boss, only to fail in the end with a strategy that sounds neat on paper, but would require perfect coordination and timing, which isn't likely to happen with early 2000s internet. But humans are humans, and we find ways to perform some bullshit, and in this case, there were strategies like the Wall of Justice that basically just hard-blocked Absolute Virtue, leaving him unable to do much of anything, and slowly but surely whittling him away. Meanwhile, another strategy involved using a bunch of Dark Knights with Kraken Clubs and various bad status effects to just bludgeon Absolute Virtue to death. Like that one Riot Police scene from Blood of Wars, which is the only piece of cultural significance that anime even has. And ultimately, that would kill the boss in under a minute. It was very comedic to watch. But what did Square Enix do in response? Not only did they make the Wall of Justice exploit not work and nerf Dark Knights to be near useless, they went so far as to say they would ban any players who attempted these cheese strats for beating the boss without the intended method, and would continue to do so throughout the life cycle of Final Fantasy XI. Hell, the game is still active, so if someone finds a new cheese strat, they'll probably kill that strategy as well and threaten more bans. I've never played Final Fantasy XI. It was before my time, and Phantasy Star Online 2 is my dedicated MMO of choice, but I couldn't not talk about this boss that to this day is considered by some to be the hardest video game boss ever created, and this boss is most definitely too much. Part 4. Punishment for Failure. One of the largest demotivators in any boss fight is the punishment for failure and the absolute insane runbacks that can come from some bosses that could cause players to drop the game entirely. No, we'll get to that fight later. This next boss, in the grand scheme of things, is probably the easiest one by far, but she walled my ass for well over a month when I played this game as a kid, and I just could not beat her for the life of me. That would be Maja from Spectrobes Beyond the Portals. One of the High Crawl, the quartet of main antagonists fought throughout the game. They all had some pretty cool intimidating presences throughout their portions of the game, but Jado and Maja were definitely given the preferential treatment of the bunch. While Jado would mostly spend his time hiding in the shadows, Maja was the one interacting with and antagonizing Radahn throughout the game, and you battled her 3 times. The first 2 times utilized her dark spectrobes, but the final time near the end of the game, she would transform into her monstrous crawl form and have the last battle against you that was for keeps. And then you get into the fight itself, and good lord, Maja is hard. Unlike the other High Crawl, she's very fast and capable of slicing through your spectrobes in seconds, while having a much larger move pool that gets deadlier as her HP drops, and since she isn't slow either, that means you have to be on the move constantly. On top of that, not only does she have more HP than any boss before her, she's accompanied by the Zealous, which will heal her throughout the fight, and between Maja's 7,000 HP and Zealous's 4,500 HP, she has a grand total of 11,500 HP, not including anything the Zealous may heal her for. To put it into perspective, that's more than the final boss of the game. And to make matters worse, she has no elemental property, meaning she's one of only 2 bosses in the game that doesn't have any weakness of any sort. There's also no way you can resist her attack damage. She's already the hardest boss fight in the game, but just to rub salt in the wound, if you lose, you have to run through the Nox City again, which might just be the longest level in the game, home to the most powerful crawl in the game, and you have to run back through it every single time you die. At least the puzzles don't reset. Is this boss fight too much? Honestly, I'm not sure. As a kid, this was my promised consort Radahn, my unbeatable hurdle. But I actually ended up beating her the first time when I forgot to swap to my main duo and I instead accidentally used Spikenor and Samugeki. This was where I learned Maja can be exploited and defeated reasonably easily, compared to normal, with the likes of ranged attacking Spectrobe. A strong ranged Spectrobe like Danafant or Samugeki can get things done pretty well. That being said, this boss fight is definitely tougher than anything else in the first 2 games, and while I may love this game to death, this fight kicked my ass so hard as a kid that now on replays I spend at least a third of the game preparing just for her battle. That's how tough it is. Part 5. Too much bullshit. Okay, now I get to rant a bit. I've mentioned it before, but I consider Copy X to be the worst video game boss ever made, with an interesting Phase 1 that has him changing elements, but having to sit through not 1 but 2 unskippable cutscenes doesn't help his case, and while Phase 1 is kinda cool at first, after a while you stop wanting to engage with it and just want to go for cheese strats because of how bad Phase 2 is. Phase 2 has a tiny arena with a handful of different attacks like lasers that are basically undodgeable, a lingering flame that you have to wall jump on one of the floating pillars until it dissipates, and sometimes you'll be so high up the flame is off screen so you don't even know when it's safe to land, and then he has his gravity rings designed to knock Zero into the bottomless pit, instantly killing him, and every time you die to this boss, you not only have to refight Phase 1, but sit through both of his unskippable cutscenes, and the only place he takes damage is his head, but only sometimes. When done properly, this phase should only last a minute, but when the best way to beat this boss is to abuse the slightly too large hitbox on a charge attack to cheat out some damage against him, that's bad game design. And while a winning run may have taken only a minute, all of the deaths and runs through Phase 1 and the unskippable cutscenes made my total time fighting this boss to get this footage of beating him 4 hours. This is one of the video game bosses that is so bad I never want to face it again, and outside of footage for a video, there's a good chance I'll never play Mega Man Zero again despite loving the other 3 games and ZX to death. Still haven't played ZX Advent though, I probably gotta fix that at some point. Okay, so I've talked about different aspects of video game bosses and how they can be exacerbated and lead to the fights being unfun or being too much to the point the player might just give up, quit the game entirely, or maybe have to go back to the drawing board and grind like crazy or what have you. But is this going somewhere? Well, kind of. I think I've ran through a bunch of different examples, so now I want to talk about 3 particular boss fights. 2 of which are well-known, common consensus, and 1 is a bit more of a personal pick, but if you've played the game you would probably agree. about bosses that often get thrown into the argument of being too much for the game they are in. And I figured, what better place to start than with the man that put people through the ringer so much it made even professionals say the company jumped the shark. Alright, here we go. Promised Consort Radahn, the most difficult boss from Software, a company known for their difficult games and boss fights, has ever produced. Considered to be one of the toughest bosses of all time, and for a brief period, even beating the likes of Absolute Virtue. That last part was very quickly forgotten about, but the fact that these two were even in the same conversation should go to show how extreme this boss is. Not helped by the infamous cross slash and his performance tanking laser light show. So, the question is this boss too much? You might be surprised to hear this, but honestly, no, he's not. Now, while you're typing out your hate comments, hear me out. Don't get me wrong, the performance issues were bad and the cross/true comboing was bullshit, but those were patched, so the performance no longer shits the bed, and if we're being real, as a From Software game, their games always run like ass on PC at launch. So, I've kinda grown used to it. But honestly, this boss has an excellent moveset, and I'm going to say something possibly heretical. I think the laser follow-ups in Phase 2 are good design, as they encourage either A, rolling in the proper direction so you focus on positioning, or B, playing aggressive and pressing right up into him when you roll, so you can just be in front of the lasers instead of getting hit by them. As for the argument that he's too aggressive and leaves no openings, I also disagree. He's aggressive, yes, and initially he feels overwhelming, but so did Millennia, Morgoth, Radahn, Mesmer. Remember, this is Elden Ring. Make your own openings. Just like after attacks mid-combo, there's enough downtime to follow up, or if an attack can be jumped instead of just dodge rolling, you should try to do that, as you can attack while in midair. I'm gonna let you in on some sacred, esoteric knowledge that From Software pros don't want you to know. Come in a little bit, listen closely. Elden Ring is not Dark Souls 3, so don't play it like Dark Souls 3. I love Dark Souls 3. It's in my top 10 favorite games of all time. I prefer it over Elden Ring. Hell, I made a 3.5-hour video talking about my love for that game. But in Dark Souls 3, the dominant strategy to beat any and all bosses, outside of cheese strats, was simply to dodge roll, then hit them when their 3 to 5 hit combo ended. Don't get me wrong, I love Dark Souls 3. I think it has one of the best boss rosters in video game history, even beating out Elden Ring. But you could easily get into a rhythm against the bosses, and it was only the likes of Nameless King or Soul of Cinder that required you to delay your dodge because of their slower, more deliberate attacks. Here, boss combos can go on for much longer, yes, but there are pauses in between the combos that can act as attack opportunities if you have good positioning and good timing. Furthermore, Dark Souls 3 only really had one way of avoiding damage against most bosses, and that was to dodge roll. If you did anything else, you were doing it wrong. But Elden Ring has 3 options. Dodge rolling, yes, but you can also jump to avoid any Quake-style attacks, or low-to-the-ground swings, which also gives an opportunity to retaliate because you can attack while you're in midair. And most importantly, you can treat this boss like a weirdo with a foot fetish, and learn how to block. Shields are not only useful in Elden Ring, but with the introduction of guard counters, they're a very solid offensive tool that works fantastically against the Promised Consort. But I don't want to use a shield, you may say. Then don't use a shield. A big critique for Elden Ring was that it needed something like Sekiro deflections to deal with some of these faster bosses. So From Software added it in. The deflecting hard tier stops damage and makes stamina loss basically non-existent, so if you time it right, you can deflect the attack, and the deflecting hard tier also boosts the power of guard counters, and that deflecting hard tier is earned from slaying the Furnace Golem at the start of the DLC, which, granted, may not be the most fun to fight, but if you've played enough Elden Ring to even reach the DLC, which as a reminder was guarded by one of the base game's super bosses, you saw that thing and likely thought, I want to kill that. But I digress. This boss is hard when you play him like Dark Souls 3, only using dodge rolls and basic attacks. But Elden Ring wants you to use the tools at your disposal. Dodge rolls, jumps, deflections, guard counters, ashes of war. Throw anything and everything you can at the boss, and you'll find that Promised Consort Radahn isn't just possible, but you might even find him fun. This isn't meant to be a Promised Consort Radahn is amazing, you just suck sort of segment. But give it a chance. There's more to it than you may think. In fact, in this playthrough, I'd only fought the required Remembrance bosses and Bale for the DLC. Meanwhile, I hadn't even finished the base game, as the furthest I'd gotten was the Godskin Duo just so I could get my weapon maxed out. And I fought this boss here and won on my 8th attempt in a fight that lasted 4.5 minutes. A bit long by From Software standards, yes. And by comparison, my most recent win against Soul of Cinder, a boss I adore, that I have fought possibly 100 times, took me over 5 minutes to beat. And that was the very last thing I had left to do in Dark Souls 3. Honestly, Elden Ring bosses become a lot easier once you internalize that most of their combos have one last attack after it seems like they've finished. And I didn't even mention the more cheeky options like summons, parrying, or Scarlet Rot. All mechanics built into the game designed for you to use, by the way. So no, I don't think Promised Consort Radahn is too much, at least for me. But if you don't like the boss, that's okay. I just recommend give him a chance. If you're not being blinded by the bias of, honestly, a lot of YouTubers back when the DLC first launched, I think you might find something fun here. But I think that's enough positivity, because now we have 2 more bosses to talk about. And I don't have nice things to say about them like I do the Promised Consort.
If you want to fight me, you'll have to deal with them first.
It is the boss that never ends. It goes on and on and on. For those of you who have played this game, you know exactly why this boss is so maligned. For those of you who haven't, let me tell you, it's basically an Asura's Wrath boss fight that never ends. It just keeps on going, and checkpoints are very sparse throughout the fight. This is a fight that should be this big epic finale, but it just doesn't know when to end, and instead ends up feeling like just an exhausting marathon. So what should be a satisfying send-off to this ambitious game, it's just not that fun, which really I guess it is a pretty fitting final boss for Ultimate Ninja Storm 3, because it's so ambitious it backfires and the game suffers heavily for it. But okay, let's talk about it a bit, as this fight is technically split into 4 phases, but really it's more like 20. The battle begins and you're given the choice of either splitting up with Killer B to take on 3 Jinchuriki on your own, or teaming up with him to take on all 6. Either way, you're going to be fighting 3 of them at a time, and while it's not the worst gank boss in the world, it sure as heck isn't fun. Yagura just exists and is honestly inoffensive, but Roshi loves to cover the arena in lava, making it a serious game of area denial. Meanwhile, Ukitaka likes sending out his little bubbles, which seem completely ineffective, and sometimes they are. They're not even remotely dangerous. But then you'll randomly get hit by one that ends up being a command grab, and all of a sudden there goes 1/3 of your health. Yukito loves dashing around the arena, firing up projectiles, but to be honest, she's not actually that bad, just pay attention. And Han loves to do his teleporting dropkick death from above, stunning bullshit that I hate. Then there's Fu. Well, actually, Fu isn't bad and would be kind of fun to fight, but by this point I'm so low on HP I don't really want to engage with her mechanics and her flying around, so I just tend to spam her down. At which point, the game is now going to power us up, but we now have to fight 2 of the tailed beasts at the same time. But in this case, the 2 tails and the 3 tails. And the game's camera is not helping things because I can't see what the fuck is going on. Thankfully, this phase really isn't that bad because you can burn through them both kinda quickly, and there's another checkpoint right after it. This is the last time this boss fight will be merciful. After it's done, you get interrupted by some cutscenes, thrown into the next phase, and now we're stuck fighting Toby and the tailed beasts 2 at a time. 5 tails and 6 tails are inoffensive at least, but they sure can be time consuming, and the entire time Kurama is narrating something, but I can't exactly hear him over the sound of multiple gods trying to kill me. And in between each pairing of tailed beasts, Toby comes down to be a nuisance, and he isn't hard, but Naruto's moveset in this form is not designed for fighting a humanoid opponent, and I could seriously do without Kurama interrupting the battle with his unskippable cutscenes. Let's keep that between phases, buddy. But it really becomes a shit show when you have to fight 4 Tails and 7 Tails at the same time, as these two do not mesh well together at all, as 4 Tails is a super aggressive melee opponent, while 7 Tails loves to hang back and fire projectiles from off screen that will pass through 4 Tails. Imagine Flameworker, but Renala was off spamming projectiles in the background. And to be fair, this kind of duo fight can work, but usually you either have control over the camera in the game or it's a 2D game so you can still see what's going on. Here, you can't control the camera really at all outside of swapping targets, which will just jerk you around to the other tail beast so you can't see the one that's right behind you. And of course, 7 Tails is the worst of the bunch because the hitboxes on this Dragonfly are janky as all hell. I cannot hit this guy to save my life with anything other than the Demon Wind Shuriken, so the optimal strategy is to just keep my distance until I can summon out 8 Tails to hit the boss and hopefully knock it down, leaving it open for a stun and a single combo because this boss does inconsistent damage where he could just slightly tickle you. Or he could deal over half your health in just a second and then you die and then you're going back to the start of the phase where you have to fight 5 and 6 Tails in the unskippable cutscenes all over again. It's not fun. Oh, and don't forget, even after all the Tails beasts go down, you're still not done, as you still have to beat Toby, and if he takes you out here, which isn't likely but possible, you're going back to the start of the phase. Okay, well that was an exhausting boss fight, but I can see how that could be kind of an epic finale for some people. What do you mean that was only half of the boss fight? After that entire marathon of a phase is done, you have a big story moment where Naruto gets Kurama's power and they fight through the 6-tailed beasts again. And you can't use items during these phases, so no healing allowed. Which is kind of a problem, because while this is supposed to be the cathartic power trip phase, the 2 Tails and 7 Tails are dangerous foes, especially 2 Tails with the quintet of fireballs that can shred Kurama's HP down to size. And yeah, while you can beat this boss, you still got 5 more tailed beasts to get through. Thankfully, 3 Tails is basically a non-issue. There's no real threat here. The 4 Tails is relatively easy, though he can be a bit dangerous up close. You can range him out, though his ultimate does require a bit more dodging because it's a bunch of area denial, lava explosion stuff, which is kinda cool. 5 Tails is basically just a game of wait and bait, so don't panic and you should be able to no damage this phase pretty easily. 6 Tails is hilarious because it's supposed to be the area denial phase, but it has no range and no mobility, so you can just spam your ranged attack and there's nothing this boss can do in response to it. Then there's 7 Tails, and of course they had to make the last part of this phase dangerous. 7 Tails loves to spam ranged attacks and has 2 different ultimates it can use. A series of triple shot tornadoes that do low damage, but they can be kind of fun to dodge. And then it can summon a bunch of massive tornadoes that can chip away at your health, but also trap you, leaving you wide open to the stab. That does enough damage to take out over a third of your health, and if you die anywhere here, you're going back to the fight against 2 Tails at the start of the phase with the fireball spamming all over again. And keep in mind, this phase lasts about 8 minutes after the last 2 phases, which also lasted about 8 minutes each. And there's still another phase. Then we get to the very last phase, where both sides are out of tricks and it's just a knockdown drag-out fight with Toby, and it's okay, I guess. It's just a versus match, and it's by far the easiest part of the fight, not even close. I guess it's kind of fun, because this game, well, they're generally fun for me, and the idea of the last phase being a no-nonsense fight is fine. But while I respect Toby bringing Abashisin to the final battle, I just don't think he's as fun to fight as Pain or Sasuke was, and all he really does is back away from you and spam his flame tornado move a whole lot, or he uses his ability to make himself intangible and not take damage. And I've refrained from mentioning it, but this game does not run well on consoles. Ninja Storm 1 and 2 I have no issues with, and 4, well, I have on PC so it doesn't matter. If I'm playing the PS3 or Nintendo version, though, my console just cannot handle this final battle at anything above 15 frames per second. This fight frustrates me because it has all the ingredients, and on paper, is an epic finale not matched anywhere else in the series and by very few other games in general. It's unrivaled in a sense of scale, but in practice it's just a long, dragged out and tedious fight, and we sometimes like to clown on final bosses of AAA games being 15-minute long marathons, but on a good day, this whole final battle is going to take you over 40 minutes. At a certain point, the fight stops being cool and just becomes exhausting. And sure enough, yes, I do think this fight is too much. But it didn't make me uninstall and quit the game permanently. The Absolute Radiance is the reason I uninstalled Hollow Knight and have no desire to ever play it again. A lot of this boss fight is the same as Radiance, with the boss loving to use and abuse heavenly nails and beams of light that move faster than ever before, where a lot of the boss fight turns into the floor is lava, or I guess the floor is spikes. Though, to be more accurate, the floor is the abyss. With the boss dealing double damage on all of her attacks, so if you find yourself in an unavoidable situation, the best strategy is oddly enough to fall into the pit so you only take 1 damage instead of 2, which is a little bit weird, but okay, fine, whatever. And there's also the 4th phase, where platforms become limited and the octo-laser becomes way harder to dodge when lasers are telegraphed with a bright yellow beam present for half a second on a bright yellow background against a boss emitting a bright white aura throughout the fight. Then there's the final phase, which is brand new to Ab's Rad, as it enters a burn phase where she warps across the arena firing out her very fast homing projectiles while you spend most of the phase pogoing in midair. And the best strategy to survive is to exploit the game's programming by sending her homing projectiles off screen to despawn. When that's the best strategy by abusing the game's programming, we have a bit of a problem. Actually, while not one-to-one, it's a very similar issue to the Okumura fight from Persona 5 Royal, where the boss fight gets easier when you increase the difficulty because of how merciless mode is programmed. But we all know that's not the real issue. The real issue with Absolute Radiance is the run-up. To her, she's at the end of the Pantheon of Hollow Nest, where you have to defeat almost every boss in the game to reach Absolute Radiance at the very end, with the exception of Grey Prince Zote that you can skip if you let him die. But the fact that I need to start a new playthrough with Absolute Radiance in mind is already concerning there. But the other issue is, to win, you have to basically beat every boss in the game without dying. But you can at least practice in the Hall of Gods, after you reach her for the first time. To even have the chance to practice against this boss, you have to be good enough at all the other bosses to even reach her when she inevitably just kills you, so then you can go practice against her in the Hall of Gods time and time again until you finally feel confident enough to beat her. But beating her here just gets you shit-talked, and to see the actual ending, you need to have practiced and practiced and practiced until you're confident enough to beat everything and not choke from the pressure. Which, by the way, the Pantheon, you're looking at a 40-minute run back at least. And it's not an easy run back. If you loved Hollow Knight, then sure. But I only liked Hollow Knight, not loved. When I beat Absolute Radiance, I didn't feel elated or ecstatic. When I won, I didn't feel relieved either. I felt empty. I remember beating this boss back in 2021, and after the ending played, I hit the home button on my Nintendo Switch, closed the game out, and uninstalled it. I haven't played the game since, and I have no desire to, and honestly, I probably never will play this game ever again. The Pantheons and Absolute Radiance ruined Hollow Knight for me. High aggression, very tanky, insane difficulty jump, too big of a punishment for failure, too much bullshit. This boss, to me, is the epitome of too much. And the Absolute Radiance was my personal breaking point. And that's all for this video. Now, was there a point to any of this? Not really, no. But it was something that had been on my mind for a while, and I just kind of wanted to put my own thoughts out there because why not? As a surprise to no one, whether a boss is or isn't too much is going to depend entirely upon the player and their tolerance for different challenges, and possibly their tolerance for bullshit. If you disagree with everything I said in the video, that's okay. If you liked the video or didn't like the video, that's okay. I simply felt like getting my own thoughts out into the world. And hey, if you did enjoy this video, consider dropping a like and subscribing. I make a lot of content of varying quality, so who knows, you might just find something you do like on here. Thanks so much for 2,000 subscribers, everyone, and I'll see you all next time. Until then, take care.